It's revealed at the very end of the series finale of this 1980s Bob Newhart TV show that the prior 8 seasons were just a dream had by the main character from Bob Newhart's 1970s TV show. And spoilers for the following Scooby-Doo episodes. The gang went a 3-week cruise ship vacation, but unfortunately for them, Shaggy makes the rookie mistake of gloating about how they wouldn't have any mysteries to get in the way of their relaxation. So of course their ship ends up being stalked by a monster from over 5,000 years in the future.
Take it easy on the bumps, Fred.
Yeah, take it easy.
Sure, Fred could drive more slowly, or, I don't know, you guys could try wearing seatbelts in a moving vehicle.
Like, just think, no ghosts or mysteries for 3 whole weeks.
Nope, no ghosts or mysteries. Just 3 weeks trapped on a cruise ship where nothing ever goes wrong. Apart from bad storms at sea, outbreaks of disease, water and sewage issues, passengers getting stranded, but no ghosts or mysteries. Also, that's not very much luggage for 3 weeks. It's lucky the gang wear the same clothes every day.
Come on, Scoob.
What's for me?
First, they make poor Scooby carry all their luggage and equipment. Then they almost leave him behind. Worst dog owners ever. 2 con men, Von Clamp and Simon Grady, devised a scheme to swindle $500,000 from a group of investors by claiming to have created a time machine. Professor Von Clamp would invite a group of wealthy men on an ocean cruise to demonstrate his invention, claiming he needed a large infusion of capital to maintain the rights to it. Grady, meanwhile, would pretend to be Von Clamp's current backer, who threatened to take full ownership of the time machine outright if the money he was allegedly owed wasn't paid in full by midnight.
They're going to buy an interest in it for $500,000.
Wow, like that would buy a million hamburgers.
If $500,000 bought a million hamburgers, that'd be 50 cents per burger according to Shaggy. I've already discussed this before in another video, but at the time, fast food burgers were around 30 cents on average. Shaggy was clearly talking about deluxe hamburgers from high-end diners. To convince everyone that the machine really worked, Von Clamp would accidentally summon a monster from the far future, in reality Grady in disguise, who would then go on a rampage by kidnapping Von Clamp and terrorizing the ship's other passengers. Upon escaping the monster's clutches, Von Clamp would then use the time machine to send the uninvited guest back home.
Do something, Professor!
Like send it back to the future!
Back to the future!
Right before disappearing, the monster would snatch the briefcase with the investment money, and the time machine would then conveniently break down and never work again. This would make the stolen money forever unrecoverable and allow Von Clamp and Grady to make their getaway. Kudos to the villains and the Scooby writers for coming up with a very original, if kind of ridiculous, plot. High marks for that, though I'm unsure how practical this would have been. For starters, it's difficult to accept that Von Clamp and Grady were able to find 6 wealthy investors gullible enough to believe that anyone could invent a time machine. I'm not saying there aren't stupid rich people in the world, but usually they're the ones doing the swindling. Perhaps the reason the demonstration was held on a cruise ship was to convince the investors to show up in the first place, because even if they thought the idea of a time machine was ludicrous, at least they'd get a 3-week vacation out of it. Judging this scheme would be a lot easier if we knew anything about Von Clamp and Grady other than what's presented in the episode. For example, we don't even know if Von Clamp was an actual professor. If he was, say, a legitimate scientist whose field was theoretical physics, the idea of him breaking the time barrier would be slightly easier to accept than if he was just some random guy showing up out of nowhere making the claim. This also goes for Simon Grady. If he was a well-known venture capitalist, it would be much easier to convince others to invest in Von Clamp's invention, as opposed to a random guy showing up out of nowhere claiming he had already put $500,000 into the professor's research. This episode definitely would have benefited had the writers included 1 or 2 brief lines about Von Clamp being a legitimate scientist who failed to create an actual time machine, and Grady being a nearly bankrupt millionaire, with the two of them trying to make one big score before disappearing. Even without the benefit of established legitimacy, the two men were still able to convince 6 wealthy investors to not only attend a demonstration at sea, but also pony up $500,000 in cash. However, not being a legitimate scientist or venture capitalist might make it easier to abscond with the stolen loot, because if the two had stuck around, they would inevitably be drawn into a lawsuit, during which a thorough investigation of the time machine would occur. This would probably result in establishing that it was fake, and the matter would quickly go from civil to criminal court. Then again, if the machine was damaged enough, Von Clamp could claim that the important timey-wimey stuff was the bits that couldn't be salvaged and that he didn't keep good enough research notes to recreate them. This would be extremely suspicious, as not keeping meticulous notes runs counter to every legitimate scientific protocol, but in a legal sense could still offer the disgraced professor the ability to avoid repercussions. Grady, if a legitimate venture capitalist, could also be shielded from lawsuits by claiming he had sunk all his money into the time machine project, and provided he could avoid too much scrutiny of his financial records, could use the loss of the invention as an excuse for his bankruptcy. Once the dust settled, the two men could split the stolen money and start new lives elsewhere. It's also possible that the 6 investors would have realized they had been duped, and instead of courting public embarrassment for their gullibility, might just let the whole matter slide and never mention it again, accepting the loss as just a painful reminder to be more careful in the future. While this plan contained some risk for Von Clamp and Grady, because of how original and how audaciously and gloriously ridiculous it was, I'm giving the men a 5 out of 5 for their design. Why did the monster look like a giant praying mantis? I keep coming back to how this was a creature from 5,000 years in the future, where it could have been anything. So why something so insectoid? But the more thought I give it, the more I start asking myself, why not something insectoid? When it comes to time travel stories involving monsters, usually the focus is on the distant past, with dinosaurs and caveman. Whereas if visiting the future, you often end up with human-descended creatures like the Morlocks. I can't help but wonder if the original conception of this episode involved traveling to the past, with the writers changing their mind at the last minute after realizing several Scooby episodes already revolved around prehistoric creatures chasing the gang. In a way, having the future monster be insectoid was rather brilliant, because supposing it would have evolved from a present-day animal, the implication is that humanity may not have survived to the year 6984 CE. A nuclear war or other disaster may have wiped out our species, leaving insects to become the dominant life form. Granted, 5 millennia shouldn't be enough time for evolution to turn a modern-day praying mantis into a 7-foot-tall biped, but the radioactive fallout could provide a viable source of mutation to accelerate the process. Setting aside the logistics of the monster's origin, it was certainly original, as the Scooby franchise had yet to see a bug creature by this point, let alone one from the distant future. The design itself was interesting, and depending upon your own phobias regarding insects, sufficiently scary. It didn't feature any special effects, but as a monster, that's not a deal breaker.
Like we gotta find costumes and disguise ourselves.
We've got the Riddler, a ballerina, young Santa Claus, a princess, a Pierrot clown, Carrot Top, and the Fonz?
Like the monster will never recognize me as Little Bo Peep. Huh, Sheep? Shall we dance?
Scooby is doing a very good job hiding his disappointment that Shaggy was the one who got to wear the Bo Peep outfit. If I had any complaints, I'd say that for a monster from the future, it would have been nice to see something more futuristic. Like if it was able to shoot laser beams out of its eyes. Or hover using telepathy. It should also be noted that the mask itself was extremely well articulated, as it was able to move its eyes and blink, as well as its mandibles when growling. It also seemed to imbue superhuman strength in its wearer.
No! No, leave me alone! Help me!
Not only could Grady easily pick up Von Clamp, but cruise ship walls are generally made of metal, and he was able to smash through the door hard enough to warp the surrounding material. An original creature design with a well-crafted and articulated costume, though sadly not taking enough advantage of the futuristic premise, leaves Von Clamp and Grady's monster with an outfit score of 4 out of 5. I'm cutting right to the chase by saying that, overall, the futuristic monster scheme went off mostly without a hitch. Unfortunately, Von Clamp made the biggest mistake a Scooby villain can make.
But we sure would like to see that demonstration.
Then you are all invited as my special guests.
Gee, thanks.
Why do so many bad guys keep doing this to themselves? If you're a villain in the middle of a nefarious enterprise, particularly one that involves monsters and disguises, the minute you see a beatnik and a Great Dane, you either abort the mission or, at the very least, don't invite the teenagers to join you when you're committing your crime.
Good night, gentlemen, and good luck, Professor.
For my first demonstration...
Grady just left the room, presumably to get into his monster costume. So why is he still in the audience?
3,000! 4,000! 5,000!
5,000 years in the future?
What animator thought it would be good to draw Fred like that? He looks like Mrs. Olsen about to drop onto a fainting couch after being scolded for gossiping about the new school marm. Remember when I said inviting the gang to where you're committing your crime is the biggest mistake a Scooby villain can make? Von Clamp also makes the second biggest mistake by staging his own kidnapping. This was unnecessary. The only thing he and Grady had to do was convince the investors that the time machine worked by accidentally summoning the futuristic monster. Having the creature rampage on the ship was more than enough to establish a sense of menace.
Let's split up and start searching.
Hold it, Fred. Don't you think we ought to stick together?
Yeah.
Come on, Scoob. Like maybe we'll get lucky and not find anything.
Notice how Fred and the girls went the opposite direction from where the monster went, leaving Shaggy and Scooby to go the way that was likely the most dangerous? Worst friends ever.
That's strange. This is the first one we found locked.
There must be something in there that someone doesn't want anyone to see.
Why is that strange? They're passengers on a cruise ship. There are likely dozens of areas restricted to crew only. I wonder how they'll get in.
Maybe I can get us in. Boost me up.
Atta girl, Daff.
I'd ask why the strong teenage boy is letting the smaller girl be the one for Daphne to stand on. But Velma obviously isn't complaining.
Hey, look at that. What is it?
It's a high-powered laser beam of some sort. I wonder what these strange little metal discs are.
Von Clamp staging his own kidnapping did nothing more than give the gang a reason to search the ship for him, which led directly to their discovery of the equipment the villains used to fake their monster's appearance.
When the laser beam hit a disc like this, it created a three-dimensional image of a monster.
Speaking of which, as seen in other Scooby episodes, this is another example of the villains getting so wrapped up in their own criminal plot that they never realized they could have made a lot more money had they simply marketed the method they used to fake their ghost or monster. Here, it's an extremely effective laser hologram system capable of producing lifelike images of the futuristic monster. Can you imagine how much money they could have made selling this technology to Led Zeppelin? I'm just happy this time we're not expected to swallow that a run-of-the-mill movie projector would be enough to fool so many people. That the two of them were able to assemble such a sophisticated method to project their monster's image does make it appear as though Von Clamp was a legitimate scientist, or that Grady had access to enough cash to finance their scheme. It's also clear that Grady wasn't exactly the brains behind the operation, considering how he chased the gang into the ship's storage locker, and it never occurred to him that all the human-sized stacks of rope would be the perfect place for the teenagers to be hiding.
Zoinks! Oh, he's got a Scoob!
I will take you with me. 5,000 years into the future.
It was nice of the monster to let the boys change back into their regular outfits before taking them away. What was Grady's plan here? After all, he wasn't really from the future. I suppose he was probably going to just tie Shaggy and Scooby up and store them in the same place where Von Clamp was hiding. It's clear he wasn't going to harm them because... Come on! It's a cruise ship in the middle of the ocean, and the railing is right there.
It's our only chance to send that thing back to the future.
Back to the future!
You've got to get the money back, Professor.
I wish I could, but the power overload has wrecked my machine beyond repair.
My uncle's an electronics genius. I'll go contact him on the ship-to-shore radio.
Do you really think it will work, miss?
According to my uncle, it will, sir.
It's also questionable if Von Clamp was that bright either, as he accepted Velma's ludicrous suggestion to allow her to allegedly contact her uncle for instructions to fix the time machine. All he had to do was refuse to allow her to touch the equipment, claiming that while the machine may not have been fixable, if he could find more investors, the old machine could be used for parts and he couldn't risk the teenagers further damaging it.
It is impossible! It is out of my hands! I am getting out of here!
So am I. I tell you, I left it in here. See?
Thanks for leading us to the money bag, Grady.
In the end, the two villains were captured after Shaggy dressed as the futuristic monster and fooled them into panicking and revealing where they had hidden the stolen money, thus proving they were trying to swindle the investors. Grady clearly spent too much time hiding the briefcase and not enough time hiding the costume because the gang were easily able to locate it for their ruse.
Yeah, perfect swindle, ruined by you meddling kids.
Dude, you invited them. You've got no one to blame but yourself.
Lock them in the brig. They'll have plenty of time there to think about time machines.
A brig is just a temporary maritime holding cell. Von Clamp and Grady will be there just until they reach port and are handed over to the real police. Or will they? While it's clear they tried to commit fraud and vandalized several sections of the ship, would they actually see any prison time? As already mentioned, would the investors want the world to know they were almost swindled by a phony scientist with a fake time machine? Would the cruise line be willing to overlook the destroyed doorway and broken ceiling to avoid making their ships look unsafe? As impressive as Von Clamp and Grady's design and costume were, they really dropped the ball during the actual execution of their plot. Grady wasn't determined enough to do much more than chase the gang, and Von Clamp showed zero ability to think on his feet by allowing Velma to mess with the time machine. They also did very little to hide the evidence of their crime. The two villains get an operation score of 2 out of 5. How did they even come up with such a good idea in the first place when they couldn't see it through competently? This leaves the futuristic monster with a decent final due score of 3.7 out of 5.
Now this is the way a pleasure cruise ought to be.
Yeah. Now hear this. All hands on food.
Either the gang are a bunch of slobs, or that lady in the pearls is seriously overdressed. I would like to take a moment to thank my new Patreon members and apologize in advance if I mispronounce any names. Nilufer. Thank you, Nilufer. Trocanero. Thank you, Trocanero. My name is Fox. Thank you, my name is Fox. Adam McCready. Thank you, Adam McCready. Shagger Dillon. Thank you, Shagger Dillon. Thank you to everyone helping support my channel. It absolutely means the world to me. If you'd like to help, there's a link to my Patreon page below, but please only join if you're comfortable doing so. New members get a personal thank you in the next regular video I upload after they join, as well as credits in each regular video for as long as they remain a paid member. The gang's latest attempt to hold a beach party is again thwarted by the arrival of a spooky undersea monster. This time it's not the ghost of a sea captain or a frozen caveman, but rather the remnant spirit of a murdered sailor, prowling the waters looking for unfortunate victims to swallow their souls.
I'll swallow your soul!
Quick, send up a distress flare! That wasn't the flare! It's the raft inflator!
Wait a minute. That's just a regular rubber boat the boys are using, not a self-inflating life raft. Even if it did come with a gas canister, the boat was already inflated, which means the pin should have already been pulled. Captain Clemens was the mastermind of a network for helping fugitives leave the country. He would provide escaped prisoners with a temporary hideout aboard a derelict submarine, altering their appearances and providing them with forged passports. Later, he would have them board an anchored ship offshore, after which they would be taken out of the country. Unlike Dr. Coffin's smuggling operation, where the smelting room in the sanitarium was in a separate location from the cave where the gold bricks were disguised as bread, it makes sense to divide up the location where escaped prisoners are hiding, so if the police find one spot, those concealed in the other have a better chance of getting away. For this scheme, the disguise chosen, a somewhat goofy-looking sea monster, does double duty as not only a scary outfit meant to frighten away any nosy trespassers, but also as a powered diving suit to transport the fugitives from the shore to the sub and later to the anchored ship. At a cursory glance, this design has a lot of problems with it, but those mostly fall under the operations section of the villain ranking. From a design standpoint, it's brilliant. Smuggling escaped convicts is a first for the franchise, and a nice change of pace from the usual stolen money or real estate swindle. It's also an interesting twist in that addition to the monster costume, additional disguises are used to obscure the identity of the fugitives to allow them to escape the police. Authorities might also be less likely to search for escaped prisoners in an area of alleged sea monster sightings. Either they think it unlikely that the escapees would be involved in such a flashy haunting, or they'd also be too scared to hide out in an area with a creature that swallows souls.
I'll swallow your soul!
This is the Scooby-Doo-niverse, remember, where rational adults accept hauntings and avoid spooky areas as a matter of course.
Let's drop anchor, Scoob. Okay. Whoa! Where'd you get this anchor? Like it weighs a ton!
Shaggy wants to know where the giant anchor bigger than their raft came from, but never bothered asking Scooby where he got the personal helicopter?
Helicopter.
The only significant flaw I could find in Clemens' design is trying to determine exactly how big of a market for his services would there be. Just how many escaped prisoners are out there on a regular basis who need help leaving the country? Clemens would either have to charge a massive amount per escape, or this is just a side hustle he does to keep busy in his retirement, and he's doing it more for kicks than anything else. Because of this, it's difficult to ascertain how valuable the scheme was. In fact, at no point in the episode is it even mentioned that Clemens was getting paid for his services. I would assume he was, but it's never actually stated that he was charging the fugitives anything. Without knowing how much he was making, or even if he was making money, it can't be determined if the plan was worth the risk of getting caught. As it stands, I'm giving Captain Clemens a design score of 4 out of 5. It was very original, and it had to have been worth it for him to go through so much trouble, but I'm deducting a point over the uncertainty if it was financially rewarding, or if he was just spending his golden years as a thrill seeker. The Scooby franchise has already seen many ocean-dwelling ghosts and creatures by this point, so a sea monster needs to be remarkable to be able to garner an impressive score. Unfortunately, that's not the case here. As for the costume's design itself, it's generic and looks like whoever came up with it had several different outfits lying around the sewing room. We see aspects of a shark, crab, frog, and kelp. It didn't have one single defining attribute, which would explain why it was referred to as a creepy heap. On the plus side, the outfit was well built for aquatic travel, with an air supply presumably in the headgear and a jet motor to aid in swimming, which was a good idea if any of the escaped prisoners couldn't swim. It's just not that scary of a costume. I suppose the teeth are somewhat menacing and the crab-like claws look like they could give victims a nasty pinch, but it lacks the ability to instill an overall sense of dread in those it's pursuing. If I had to pick one single reason for why the suit fails, it's either the color or the hair. Pastel yellow is a soothing color and inappropriate for a monster. In fact, yellow is more the color of those coming to rescue you from a dangerous situation than those putting you in one. Meanwhile, the hair makes the monster look like it should be tanking a career in entertainment by hosting a conspiracy podcast. Though at least we do know one person who may have been a fan.
Aha! You have come for the Madam Shaggy's beauty treatment, no?
Oh, lucky Scooby. He only had to wait one episode before he got to dress up as a lady again. Well built but not well designed, and appropriate for the location but lacking in originality, the Creepy Heap from the Deep gets an outfit score of 2.5 out of 5. Clements and his current fugitive made several mistakes and errors in judgment, but I'll get to those in a bit. First, let's discuss the biggest issue with the operation: the derelict submarine. There's no way in hell that it could have been discovered and used the way we see in the episode. Despite being vehicles built for military service and with the ability to survive in the punishing ocean depths, submarines are a curious mix of strength and fragility and require extremely specialized skills to operate and maintain seaworthiness. Hundreds have been lost over the years during naval battles, but also from faulty equipment and piloting errors. At the depths they usually traverse, if a submarine is damaged enough to sink and for the crew to abandon ship, the wreck would likely be unusable by the time it hits the seafloor. There's no way Clements could have found a derelict submarine by chance in good enough condition to have remained watertight and safe for habitation. The surviving crew would have reported where the vessel was lost, and as it was a relatively shallow part of the ocean, as seen by how easily the escaped prisoners and the Scooby Gang were able to reach it, whatever government owned the submarine would either try recovering the wreck or scuttle it beyond the ability to salvage in order to keep military secrets safe from hostile foreign governments. Even if by chance the submarine was abandoned and managed to sink while still maintaining hull integrity, the harsh sea conditions would eventually cause cracks that would result in flooding the vessel. There's a reason most submarines don't stay submerged for more than 1 or 2 months at a time and are constantly under maintenance by their crew. Setting aside how the submarine would have maintained seaworthiness, there's also the question of how it maintained its life support systems. Submarines require a constant interior air supply, either by using canisters of compressed gas or by generating it through electrolysing seawater to extract the needed oxygen. Both of those would require a crew to maintain, especially the latter, which would need the ship's batteries to remain charged. Speaking of which, even if Clements was able to somehow get oxygen canisters replenished in the derelict sub, the ship's batteries would still need charging to keep the lights and heat working. For submarines, this is accomplished either by using a diesel-powered engine or a nuclear reactor. This is an older sub, so clearly it's not the latter, which means Clements would have needed regular supplies of diesel fuel to keep his operation going. I get why the Scooby writers chose a submarine because it's a cool, exotic location, but it would have made a lot more sense had Clements found an underwater cave or grotto to hide his escaped prisoners.
Jinkies, it's a ship! Come on, let's sneak aboard.
It should also be noted that a large ship like that requires at least a minimal crew complement, and despite the sheriff mentioning having captured everyone on the ship, at no point was a single sailor seen on the vessel. Limiting the discussion to just what we see on screen, for Clements to have accomplished what he did, it's obvious that, once again, organized crime is likely the answer. Not only would the mob have access to enough funds to theoretically maintain the seaworthiness of a submarine, but they could also threaten or bribe naval officials into keeping the missing sub off the books, solving that problem too. A crime syndicate would also close another significant plot hole. Presuming Clements was being paid handsomely enough to make all this hassle worthwhile, how would a convict on the run manage to come up with the money needed to pay him in the first place? It's conceivable that one or two might have been able to stash their loot before being caught and imprisoned, but that would require the escaped men to go wherever they hid their loot before meeting up with Clements, greatly increasing the odds of being recaptured. It makes a lot more sense if the mob hired Clements directly to smuggle members of their cartel out of the country. Clements himself could have even been a small-time enforcer for them, or a retired capo or other regime member spending his retirement comfortably and only handling the occasional favor for his former associates. However, if Clements had been a mobster, you'd think he would have been less sloppy. For starters, when the current wearer of the creepy heap costume failed to scare the gang off the beach and instead drove them toward Clements' house, why did he bother opening the door to let the teenagers inside? If he would have kept the door shut, it might have allowed the creepy heap to catch up with the gang and hopefully get them to leave the beach.
The legend says that 100 years ago, an evil sailor had a terrible curse put on him by his shipmates, and they threw him overboard. It needs human spirits to stay alive.
Why is he acting scared here? Clements is the mastermind of the scheme and knows the monster isn't real. Or is this one of those situations where a coworker tried playing a prank, despite it not being the time or place for one?
Let's get out of here!
For once, you're right, Shaggy.
I am?
Yes?
The first thing we're gonna do is get to the mystery machine and notify the sheriff.
Wow, Fred's doing it again by calling the sheriff early, though I'm not sure he gave this enough thought. If he calls the authorities now, anything the gang does from that point on is going to contaminate the crime scene and interfere with the official investigation.
Maybe we should try to find his footprints and follow them.
Nice try, Scoob.
Case in point. Scooby is literally erasing evidence.
Those prints lead back toward the captain's house. Come on, we've got to warn him.
For some reason, the gang decided to switch to the European mystery machine, considering which side of the vehicle the steering wheel is on now.
Quick inside! I'll see if it followed you. The lines must have been down by the storm. And the second thing?
Solve the mystery of the creepy heap from the deep.
Look at Captain Clements!
I'm really confused by that door. When we first see it, it doesn't appear to have a doorknob, and the only way to keep it closed is by putting down the wooden plank. Later, after the gang leave, we see it has a doorknob on one side, but no internal latch. Finally, after the monster attack, we see it partially torn off the hinges, and both barricade brackets are gone.
The monster's got him!
Look, he tried to leave a message.
Creature spirit.
The creature stole his spirit.
After recounting the legend of the cursed sailor and seeing the gang out, why did Clements bother faking the attack and pretending to have the sea monster swallow his soul?
I'll swallow your soul!
Did he panic because the teenagers weren't leaving the beach, so he quickly applied white powder and eyeliner and bleached his beard? Once it became apparent that Fred and the rest weren't going to leave, Clements should have killed them, considering he was looking at a seriously long prison sentence if caught.
That's a bad customer, all right. Except he looks a lot better here.
And it's him, okay, even with the blonde hair and mustache disguise.
It's all starting to make sense.
Why would Clements have needed the wanted poster on the wall, and why did he keep a photo of the fugitives with their new appearance? All this accomplished was making it obvious the submarine was connected to the prison escapees, and worse, allow their pursuers to know exactly what they looked like now.
The monster's locking us in.
Oh, great! We're under 50 feet of ocean, trapped inside a submarine, water rising, and a monster outside!
We're doomed.
The submarine alone is easily 50 feet tall from the base to the top of the conning tower. Judging by how deep the vessel is on the seabed, it's obvious that the gang are much, much further down than just 50 feet.
Fortunately for us, this is the submarine's airlock.
Right, which means we can open that hatch up there and leave the sub the same way we came in.
They did not have their dive masks or tanks when they went into that room. Instead of Scooby-Doo, where are you? The question should be, Scooby-Doo, where the hell are you carrying all this stuff? In general, the deepest most scuba divers can safely go is around 130 feet. The teenagers are clearly much further down than that. It's not exactly impossible for them to reach that depth, but as quickly as Shaggy and Scooby swam back to the surface, they should both be suffering from massive embolisms. At least whoever was wearing the creepy heap suit had the wherewithal to try murdering the gang, which is more than Clements was able to accomplish.
Look, an old shack.
It looks deserted, I hope.
Let's check it out. Let's check inside.
Look at this, Fred. More tracks.
Let's see where they go.
Those are definitely not the same tracks that Fred and Daphne first saw. Setting aside all my theories about the submarine and mob involvement and focusing strictly on what we see in the episode, Clements and his unnamed accomplice get an operation score of 3 out of 5. They earned points for helping at least one criminal get out of the country before the gang got involved, as well as being able to maintain a derelict submarine in a habitable condition. But they failed miserably when it came to dealing with the meddling kids, though at least the guy wearing the creepy heap suit realized how high the stakes were when he tried drowning them.
And that will blow them onto the torpedo cart. They'll slide inside the launch tube, and we'll launch them onto the beach. You got it?
Got it.
Great plan, Fred. If you don't mind being an accessory to manslaughter. Despite what cartoons have shown over the years, a torpedo tube is not designed to launch a human like that. Submarines use incredible pressure to launch a 1.5-ton torpedo during an attack. It uses so much force, in fact, that sailors throughout the vessel can feel the shaking. Imagine what that would do to flesh and bone. The creepy heap from the deep gets a final due score of 3.2 out of 5. I'm getting some real squiddly diddly vibes here. And that's my ranking of the villains from the final set of episodes of the second season of the Scooby-Doo show, shown here along with the ones from my previous videos. Overall, Season 2 seemed to have had more hits than misses compared to Season 1, where most of the villains were average at best. Indeed, with Season 2 only having highs and lows with nothing much in between, none of the episodes could be considered boring. As usual, I'm planning to revisit the Scooby Renaissance before starting Season 3, so please be on the lookout for that. I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon below, but please only join if you're comfortable doing so. Patreon members receive credit in my videos for as long as they remain a paid member, as well as a personal shout out in the next regular video produced after they join.